All right, thanks for that, Christina. We will go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for bearing with us. Apparently we've had 2 Zoom rooms, so I apologize about that. All right, welcome to the current webinar series, the current webinar series. Wow, all dogs, new tricks. The Soil Health Nexus Digital Cafe. Sorry, I went straight into the other webinar that we host. So we're excited to have you here today. And again, I apologize about the technical difficulties. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Soil Health Nexus, we've been around since 2015, and we're a university-led team dedicated to increasing access to research-based soil health knowledge, extension, and resources. We have representatives from Extension from all 12 states in the North Central region, as well as key organizational partners like one of the presenters that you're going to be hearing from today. So how the format's going to work is we're going to have a presentation from Randy Zogbaum, and then after the presentation, we'll take some time for Q&A. So please list your questions for Randy in the chat. We can also, at that time, you can unmute yourself and ask your question that way. And then after we have questions, we will have a breakout rooms. And you can see here we have it set up as breakout rooms by audience. So you can join one with fellow educators, with researchers, agency staff, farmers, and students. And if we don't have folks for each category, we can always combine accordingly. And we'll have discussion about our reactions to the presentation, next steps, as well as generally what additional ideas folks have for future presenters. So today's presentation is going to be by Randy Zogbaum. Randy worked with me at the University of Wisconsin Extension for many years, and is now currently the soil health specialist with the Wisconsin Department of Agricultural Trade and Consumer Protection. And for folks not in Wisconsin, we go by DATCP. He's going to be talking about the Producer-Led Watershed program, which is unique here in Wisconsin, as well as some of the tracking results he has from that, and the focus that program, as well as his program at DATCP, has on soil health. All right, so I will stop sharing and hand it over to you, Randy.
Ready. Let's see if I can share. Looks. Are you seeing my website here?
Yeah, it looks great.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. All right. Well, thanks, Ann. As Ann said, we've had an opportunity to work together for many years. I'll share just a little bit of my background so you know where I'm coming from, maybe, and also a little bit about our department and our role in the state, just so that's a little more clear too for everybody who's not from Wisconsin. So I've been working in what we now call soil health for somewhere north of 25 years, close to 28 years. I've tried to do the math on, I'm not exactly sure when I started, but somewhere before time, I think, was when it began. And I've had the opportunity to work in our university extension in a handful of different capacities over the years, including most recently with Ann and the Soil Health Nexus as the Crops and Soils Program Manager, before moving over to this role at DATCP. One of the things that's maybe unique for the Wisconsin agriculture and the way we're set up with our relationship with our land conservation offices from other states. I'm kind of learning a little more about this as we go along, but we have in Wisconsin that we have a statutory responsibility in the department to both provide opportunities for funding and then technical support to our land conservation offices that carry out conservation practices. I just got kicked out of my sharing, I think.
Sorry about that, Randy. Here, try again.
Yeah, no worries. Well, we can I'll finish up what I was saying here because I then carry over. Try that again. Back to the website. All right, awesome. So as I was saying, that's just a little bit about it, because it comes into play on how what the producer-led program is about, and then also the soil health program that I'm developing. But to start out, I bounced around on where to start out. Our soil health program is one of my responsibilities, and the tracking is part of that. But I thought understanding my position really came out of this producer-led program because of the impact that it has had on and raising awareness and implementation of soil health practices in farms around the state. The program started in 2016. The intent of it's a legislative program. It's a grant program, annual grant program, that the intent of which is to say to producers in a watershed, in a particular watershed, and these typically are, if you're familiar with the USGS systems, the HUC 10s or HUC 12s, so a portion of a county is usually what it ends up being. In some cases, there's multiple watersheds there. The purpose is to say that farmers are a part of this system and maybe a part of the solution. Let's get together and figure out how to solve water quality problems in your area. So that started in 2016. Actually, the process was going on before that. There were groups of farmers already doing this, and then the state provided funding to help support that in 2016. There were 14 groups in 2016. This year in 2024, we're up to 47 groups around the state. Just a little bit more about the kind of requirements. So like I said, you have to have at least 5 farmers. Can you see my pointer when I do that? I'm not sure.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, good. Otherwise, I'm circling something that you have no idea what I'm talking about. You can find it eventually because it's a bullet point on the screen. But so it has to have at least 5 farmers with it that live and work within that watershed. There's at least 1 collaborator. Usually, that's broken up into a few different categories. Sometimes the County Land Conservation Office does that. There's a number that have partnerships with both our natural resource educators and UW Extension, as well as Ag Institute folks. There's a couple that are supported by the DNR, and there's a number of nonprofit organizations, some of which specifically developed to support this farmer-led watershed program, and some are more national, like the Pheasants Forever is involved with some, and our TNC in Wisconsin, our Nature Conservancy, also serves to be a collaborator with a number of the groups. I'm okay if people have questions along the way, if it's all right with you, Ann, if we stop and have questions along the way, or does that throw your format off a little bit?
No, go for it. You can either unmute or you can put your questions in the chat.
Awesome. So I know there's not a lot of, if you're not from Wisconsin, you might not have had any familiarity. If you want to kind of know a little more, we can take a second to look at the history of this here. If not, hearing none, not seeing anything in the chat, I also do things a little differently than most people. Ann was like, what do you mean, Randy? You want to just present? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go back on. Sorry, no question there.
Okay, no worries. Instead of putting together a PowerPoint for this, as I was looking at that, I realized everything that I have here is on our website. So I did put together a list of the websites that I'm presenting, and I'll share that with you if you want to share that out, if people want to come back and look around a little bit later. So I'll take a step back and talk about our soil health program. So for the last year and a half or so, almost exactly a year and a half, I've served in this role as a soil health specialist for our Wisconsin Department of Ag. The only soil health specialist that I'm aware of that's funded by the state of Wisconsin anyway. Their NRCS has had a soil health specialist presence for a number of years, but this is the first one for the state of Wisconsin. Hopefully there'll be others along the way, but the reason that happened is really directly related again to the importance of soil health within these producer-led watershed programs that we'll take a little bit more look at closely in a few minutes. But with our soil health, we've started our presence here with a website, and again, we're working on. We have new rules coming out this year that include a lot of soil health practices for our county land conservation offices and doing the training around this. Wanted to get a clear vision of what it means to be soil health in the state within our land conservation society anyway. And for me, we took on the NRCS definition, looking at the soil as a vital living ecosystem, and soil health is about bringing back the functionality that a soil provides, that a soil system would provide. You may notice that we adapted the 5-principle model of soil health here. Wisconsin is a dairy state. There's a lot of animals in beef and sheep and others that are a part of that. So we split out NRCS's model with the biodiversity and looked at integrating livestock separately from crop diversity as part of that. All righty, anything on that real quick? We can share at the end too. So as I mentioned, one of our responsibilities at the department then is to create a training and support system for our technical system for our land conservation staff. We just released this spring, our soil health online training that we developed in partnership with the University of Wisconsin and was supported by USDA funding, NRCS funding. Looking at kind of, again, this idea of building this concept of what we mean by soil health, making sure we have a common definition and a common language. The first 3 modules are developed in part of this. It's about 45 minutes to go through, set up in a way that you can bookmark and come back, so you don't have to sit the full 45 minutes. If you don't have time, you can break it up. And then this summer, we're going to do some on-farm, looking at how these practices and principles are fit on farms in Wisconsin. So we'll be developing this 4th section of applied strategies this summer. All righty, any questions? That's just a quick snippet on our soil health program, where we're at with that. So one of my roles with the department then is also a portion of our annual grants. So there's 3 major categories that the producer-led grants can be used for. One part of that is to do conservation work. It's cost share programs typically to help move conservation practices onto the ground in those watersheds. There's also education and outreach component and a research and demonstration component. For the newer programs, the first 2 years, there's also their focus is typically on organizational development in the process. So those years they usually don't do as much work without education and outreach in particular, but the idea of getting the groups off the ground. So every year, the groups have to report back to us the amount of practices and cost share dollars that they used. Their grant requires a 1-to-1 match, so a lot of times that'll be met in part by producer applying more conservation practice. So for example, if somebody took cost share to put on 40 acres of a rye cover crop, they may choose to add another however many 60 or 100 acres of that cover crop, and that additional land then would be considered in-kind contribution to the grant. So what we look at then every year is that how many conservation practices happen from that total number and related to the cost share program. And last year, I haven't completed this year's numbers yet, so I wasn't able to share those with you, but they're higher. Where we're at right now in preliminary is higher than last year again. If you see from 2019, when we first started doing the conservation tracking at DATCP through last year, or 2022, 2 years ago, we've reached over 1 million acres in conservation practices in these watershed groups. That's 36 groups at that time. was almost 1,900 members. That's a little bit of a fuzzy figure. How membership is defined is up to the group. So there is about 36 different ways to define membership. But just to give you a ballpark of, you're looking at almost 650,000 acres of farmland. How we get to 1.1 million on that, a lot of them do multiple practices, of course. And then keeping an eye then on the conservation that comes from that. Looking at the no-till practices and cover crops are kind of the two main ones that we look at, as well as nutrient management. There is a gigantic increase, 35% in no-till and 27% in cover crops that year. Nutrient management is a big one too. And then taking a look at our, we use in Wisconsin, we have a nutrient management planning tool that looks at in part soil loss. So we use that. It does a Russell 2 calculation based on the practices used in that rotation. So we use that tool to estimate the amount of sediment and phosphorus that were not lost due to implementing no-till and cover crop practices in these acres, and that's the result of this. The tons of carbon is we run those same numbers through Comet Planner or Comet Farmer rather with NRCS's tool to get that estimate. And then looking at all the different innovative practices that are coming out. So my spreadsheet every year starts out with either single species or multi-species cover crop and then no-till or reduced till, but the expansion of that sheet where groups are trying on new programs and new practices grows every single year. So the number of practices reported grew to like 35 last year. This year is as high as 47 different practices that groups are trying out, which we'll touch on in just a second. I guess I'm gonna skip that one because we went. Any questions on this part on the annual conservation tracking part of it? This gets a little.
Is a
Pardon?
question in the chat.
Oh.
Randy, is there any monitoring or measurement of results other than the use of models?
Well, that's a great question. And well, actually, there is in some places, and I guess you can expand on what you mean by the measurements if you're talking about water quality things. So in a moment, I was going to talk to some of the research and demonstration, but we can touch on that a little bit. So a lot of these groups have formed partnerships around the state with the university researchers and different groups. So some of that happens if you're familiar with UW Discovery Farms doing surface water monitoring. A number of the watersheds have Discovery Farms partnership in them. So a number of these also partner with our DNR or land conservation. So they'll be looking at that particular water body that's listed for the group and monitoring runoff that way. Unfortunately, for the whole state, it's hard to cover everything. So this model is a conservative estimate is about as good as we can get with that. We're hoping to grow other ways of building in that and using maybe being able to find ways to expand and ground truth the models as well. Does that get to it, Peter, or is there more?
Well, I'm thinking about things like producer participation in, say, infiltration tests or something, which is a great way to get a hands-on understanding of soil health principles.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great. So my colleague Danny Heisler, who's our program manager, and I are looking at new ways to do some of the things that you're talking about there. How do we build on this? I mean, it's a 9-year-old program. It's really kind of reaching the ability to handle this part of it, and these other ideas are how do we move forward and find new ways. And I think doing the infiltration or doing other ground truthing of models would be one of the things we're definitely interested in implementing as we go forward. And a number of the groups are doing that. It's just how do you get that in a shared out amongst 47 groups across the state?
Right. It looks like Haley has a question as well. Can you repeat what model you use for water quality estimation? I know you mentioned Comet.
Comet is the carbon one. That's NRCS's tool. We use Snap Plus, which is actually a nutrient management tool, but it calculates soil loss. It calculates T through the modified version of Russell 2, and so that we use that as to get our soil loss estimates from changing to no-till and changing to adding cover crops in a rotation.
Great, thanks. Yeah, maybe some folks outside of Wisconsin might not be familiar with.
Yeah, that's always a challenge when we talk about Snap Plus in Wisconsin. It's not something that is calibrated for all you that are somewhere else. But well, I was going to ask this question at the end, but maybe it's a good time. But what other models would you all suggest that you would use in a separate? The infield would be awesome. I mean, we're working on how to do that. And that also sometimes requires an army of people, which is another issue, but we can kind of come back to that. So let's see. Here's this one. Open. So the other thing that we do in our is every other year we've done this impact report, which takes a little deeper look at things and how the grants and the impacts are changing behaviors. One of the things we'll be doing this for 2022 and 2023 yet this summer. So that report isn't ready for this, but it'll be added in here. One of the interesting things I think in this latest report is that as the groups mature, conservation practices are certainly, the cost sharing is certainly a way that they use to reach new members and new people, but their focus seems to be changing to education and outreach and then research and demonstration. So Peter, maybe to your point, there's a great deal of opportunity now to sort of make sure that we have, say, infiltration networks set up around the state to look at how the practices impact different farming groups, different soil types, and different climates that we have in Wisconsin, or other. Our NRCS just put together and published their what do they call it? Conservation, the SEMA for soil health, the conservation evaluation methods. So making sure we get those out on the producer-led groups around the state to see how these practices are changing soil health measures will be a big part of where we go forward.
Randy, you got a comment and then a question if you're taking anything right now.
Well, sure. I more or less at the end here of. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay. Secretary Vilsack was in Buffalo County, Fountain City here a month or so ago, and they were kicking off climate smart practices and climate friendly products. Your secretary did a really nice job from Wisconsin talking about all of these, this program in particular and how successful it is. So I see a lot of farmers planting corn, silage corn into harvested triticale or rye, winter rye. And dig in a little deeper on how you kind of look at that nutrient management plan for having enough nitrogen when you're planting corn into that triticale and or rye. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So that's something that we're working with our nutrient management team, is making sure that we have proper nutrient recommendations, but also one of the, as I mentioned, this on-farm research and demonstration, the groups are doing that as well. So ground truthing and making sure that you are able to do, in fact, this is you can't read it probably here, but this first group is Bear Creek Chippewa, trialing nitrogen fixing corn and looking at how that works in their rotation. As new practices come into being, how does that affect nutrient management? That's a big part of what these groups are doing, is ground truthing that. Our SNAP Plus program does address adding cover crops in with uh, with the growth in the number of cover crops available. It's hard to keep ahead of what's in there in that program, but the principles are out there for it. And with this, that it's one of the things that is, I think, pretty powerful. The farmers in these groups over time really have taken it upon themselves to make sure that they're learning on their farms, and more importantly, sharing with other people. The grassroots efforts that come out of this have been phenomenal to see. Did I get to all of your question?
Did a great job. We heard Daniel Smith here, a month or so ago. He did a really nice job of looking at how no-till worked in 2023. He's got a great presentation, and yeah, his take homes were, it looked pretty tough at the beginning of the season. Corn coming up in no-till situations in Platteville, around Platteville, but in the end, it delivered. So keep up the good work, Randall.
Yeah, I think that well, I look at it from the conservation side of things. This is a water quality legislation that funds this is geared towards water quality. We also learned a lot about the social aspects of this, and some of the partnerships that we've done with our natural resource educators are taking a look at some of that, as like how do you actually implement change in conservation. This is purely anecdotal, but I noticed in my drives around the state a heck of a lot more cover crops on the ground this last winter. And I went back and overlaid or looked side by side at a map, the road map of where I travel, and the where producer-led watershed groups are. It's not 100%, but there's a lot of conservation going on the ground where these producer-led groups are up and functioning versus where they're not. It's kind of interesting to see, and in fact, there's other studies going on that look at some of that social aspect of this and how that leads to change.
Looks like, and I'm just gonna make sure I say these questions so that they're recorded. Marcel's curious, in the conservation progress report, she was surprised to see more cover crop acres than no-till acres. That's you, Randy, or no?
Well, that's a great catch, Marcel, and kind of my take on that is that if you're already, so you got to remember that this is tracking our cost share program. So if a producer is already doing no-till and adding cover crops to that, that would be a part of that. We're trying to find ways to do, to go further into this and look at, beyond the cost share program, some ways of knowing what kind of conservation practices. And one of the groups that we do work with, that works with several of the producer-leds, does a more in-depth survey directly. So some of those things might come out of that, but that would be my take on where that particular one is, Marcel, is that the cost share isn't as high for no-till because no-till has already been implemented on those farms, and they're adding cover crops as an additional practice.
That makes sense.
There's a question here from Ron as well. The program has been such a success in Wisconsin. Certainly Ron Sharp would know with his active participation. Why do you think other states haven't started something similar?
Ron's on. Hey, good to see you, buddy. I think that's a great question, and Ron's kind of a loaded question because he's done some work trying to help other states get going. I know there has been some attempts, and I know there's some interest, but maybe some of the folks from other states might have a better way to answer that than I would. I think Illinois has looked at some programs from their legislature. Of course, if others know of interest or where you're at in your state, that'd be great to share.
Yeah, feel free to unmute and note here. Obviously every state is unique, but one of the things Randy and I have chatted about is certainly that this program is something that can kind of be supported across aisles, and it's very much, looking to folks that are, as the landowners, as the leaders, is I think something that's very palatable. Obviously there's got to be, the budget dollars in there, but in terms of potential solutions. Another comment here, I'm just noting, we'd really like to try it in the Mid-Atlantic, but our cost share programs almost make it hard to implement, ironically. We need to figure out a way to build farmer leadership into our conservation work here. Any thoughts on that, Randy, in terms of the cost share making it difficult? Or Amanda, feel free to unmute and expand a little bit on that, specific to the state that you're in.
Yeah, sorry, go on, Randy.
No, that's okay. Please do.
I was just going to say, we live and work in Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania, and there is so much cost share available for these practices that, I just think one of the really valuable aspects of this program is that farmer leadership and kind of building the momentum, building the innovation from the farmer side, building the buy-in from the farmer side. And I think it's so ironic that it's hard for us to, and this is a really efficient program. Like you're using a relatively small amount of money to drive a lot of innovation. And because we have these cost share dollars available for these practices coming from the state level in most cases, we can't figure out a way to fund a similar program with that same level of efficiency. So yeah, I'm trying to think creatively about how we could bring it to our region in a slightly different form, but really admire this model and excited about it.
Well, I appreciate that, Amanda, and I don't have an answer for you with the cost share. Clearly, if you have other sources, that's something that we have in Wisconsin as well. I really think the key is the grassroots part of it, though. That requirement for 5 farmers in a watershed to be leaders. The grants don't get funded if they're not. You can smell that right away. It has to be that local group that drives this and having that leadership. There's this, I pulled up this website, which is sort of a defunct program now because we don't have the money for it, but we did get some funding as this program grew. I mentioned earlier that we're seeing the more mature groups move away from cost sharing so much and putting more of their grant dollar efforts towards education and outreach in particular, and also some are doing the research and demonstration. Um, we we did recognize the importance of people like Ron Shep and others around the state, and their willingness to share their experiences pretty much with anybody you'll call them. So I'm not giving Ron's number out while we're on the line, but they're very much driven by local leadership and statewide leadership and willingness to share what they're learning, and more, maybe just as importantly, the failures that they had along the way, to help people out that way. So we did have this mentorship program last year in our grant application. I don't know how well this was noticed, but we did raise the point value for that local leadership component in our grants. So we are evaluating the existing groups. So if you're a new group, we consider you for the first 2 years a new group, and that's mostly around, like I said, organizational development is very important, getting the infrastructure in place. A number of the groups, I don't know the percentage, I'm sorry, I should know this, but a number of these groups that have been in place for a while are now formed 501c3 nonprofit status, and so they take in funds, whether it's membership funds from the people self-funding through membership funds, or they're also applying for other grants and getting funds from in some cases, a lot of cases. And Ron lives in a place where our local lakes people and the lake groups that are in these same vicinities see the value of this and are partnering with the groups. It's kind of amazing to see and pointed to, and I'll take the risk of stepping out, not really out in the political realm too much, but we live in a pretty divided state in Wisconsin right at the moment, and this program is maybe bar none heavily supported by both Republican and Democrat leaders in the legislature and the governor's office, and they all really get behind it. It's kind of nice to see that kind of support, and it's really because of the value of that local partnership and that value of the local grassroots effort that is driving this. I don't know others who are experiencing it, please share.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Randy. And that was the point I was trying to make, is that it's very, it's very appealing, regardless of your perspective. And Bradley Robinson is noting the same thing. There would not be nearly as much participation if the program was led by agency staff, versus that, since it's farmer led, that's what, makes it so universally appealing. We have a couple questions coming in, so I'm going to note those to you and make sure I ask them verbally here so that we get them recorded. Laura Campbell, she is talking about, and it's been a little while since I've seen that name, farmer-led programs that they've been involved with in Michigan. One of the biggest struggles is the long-term administrative or logistical support. We've talked about this before, kind of that backbone organization in terms of someone to schedule meetings, arrange speakers, plan events, that farmers just don't have the time to do. So do you have recommendations from your experience on building in that cost, or that staff structure? Maybe you can talk about, because each of these groups, while it has to have at least 5 farmers, you very briefly touched on that, it has to have like a program collaborator, right?
Collaborator.
Chat a little bit about that and the recommendation you have for that, like how is that built in terms of the staff structure, administrative support, or like the money, the grant, like what portion of the grant is going towards that collaborator versus on-farm practices or cost share, etc.
Yeah, and I'm sorry I don't have this off the top of my head, but we do have a maximum amount of that 40,000. And I should say, in this last couple years, we've had, as you can see, if you look back at this, there's quite a significant over ask for the total allocation. So the grants aren't $40,000 anymore. We have to reduce each to make sure that everybody gets an award. But there is a percentage, and it's a small percentage of the grant. I want to say 25%, but Brad or Ron, do you remember exactly? Can you share? If you remember exactly what that is? If somebody really wants to know that for sure, you can reach out to me or my colleague Danny Heisler. I'll be glad to get that info for you, the exact number. But that was an important part of it right away. You have a volunteer organization of people who are very busy working on their farms. They're very dedicated to helping others, but they still are farmers in a business and they have to do that, right? So in order for this group to work, there has to be somebody that comes in and helps. I mentioned the first 2 years of a grant are expected to do organizational development, and we do a partnership with our natural resource educators, have specific training and organizational development skills. So setting up a mission, vision, goals, that kind of thing, helping people set up a structure. Once you go to that 501c3, now you have a more stable structure financially too. But depending on where you're at and who you're working with, typically the Land Conservation Office or a UW Extension person might be that. And as I mentioned, there's a group in Wisconsin called Farmers for Sustainable Food that they've developed to support, what are the 7 of the 47 groups have hired them to do the administrative work. And TNC, Wisconsin Nature Conservancy, supports 12 groups around the state. Pheasants Forever, I forget the number there with 2 or 3. Brad Robeson, who you mentioned is in Western Wisconsin. There's a group that's reforming, and I can't remember the name of it now, Brad, I'm sorry about that. But there's a nonprofit that works with 4 of the groups in that area that are pretty closely connected geographically within Vernon County, one of our counties in Wisconsin. Yeah, so, and then there's another part that isn't listed on here, that there also has to be a fiscal agent. So a person you have to be a legal entity for us to provide that grant money to you, right? So there are the 3 kind of partnerships that infrastructural partnerships that have to make these grants work. Is it perfect? Probably not. No, there's a lot of things that we're still learning. After 9 years, we try to help. One of the things that our program manager does is to try to make sure that we're pulling these things together and make sure we have the resources to expand and help build that aspect of it, though. So that the producer-led and the momentum doesn't get lost and bogged down in administrative duties. But hopefully we're mostly successful at that. We've grown over the last decade or so.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's good point, Laura, that's needed, and that's one of the things that's built into this program is that administrative support. Jada is out in Idaho and has a question in terms of, can you talk a little bit more about how the program was funded? Or perhaps Randy, if you know a little bit about the history of how it, went through the legislature to get funded. With some of the questions about monitoring outside of modeling, is that also built into the program at all in terms of the monitoring? Because they've had issues in Idaho of no funding available for producers and conservation districts to do that on the farm, on ground monitoring.
Yeah, so this is a part of our biennial state budget. Now it's a program within the state budget, specifically this last fiscal year and the next fiscal year are $1 million allocations from our state budget system. And that, as I mentioned, started with I'm going to get this kind of wrong because I'm not a political scientist, but basically the way it works is that somebody proposes this in the budget bill and then it becomes a part of state law, and that happened in 2016 to form this program. How you do that as far as getting your legislature behind it, I think there were groups doing this kind of work around the state, a handful of them, and most of probably the 14 groups that were originally applied for this were functioning in some way, shape, or form. And I should say there's also groups that are still doing it and have chosen not to apply for DATCP funds. There are people who just said, well, we're functioning fine the way we are, and we're going to go ahead and do this without funding. A lot of them have come to the table for funding over time, but there's still a handful out there. I think that model was what got local legislators excited about the effects. I think one of the, when you see the impact that these groups have on improving water quality in a local area, that may really helps you tell a success story as a legislator, and enough of that happened where it was able to go ahead and successfully allocate funds to a new program in a time in the state where that didn't happen a lot. So, and as you can see from this one, it grew pretty substantially in the amount of grant offerings to where we're at today with $1 million.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I know personally for myself, I'm not as familiar with the background. I wasn't in the state at that time. But certainly is an interesting, I guess, political question as it's now put into state law. Peter has a suggestion for folks in terms of a web application that supports groups in monitoring, demonstration, research, and peer-to-peer learning. And that's soilhealth.app. So noting there, and then Brad has put in some notes about some of those kind of backbone organizations that are supporting these producer-led groups like Valley Stewardship Network and Hill Country Watershed Alliance. Just Randy, real quick, does the program does not include, the grant program does not include funds for monitoring. Is that correct? Or can folks write in for monitoring? I know that was a question of Shuzada that maybe we didn't address.
That's a good question. I don't know that they couldn't as part of the research and demonstration put in for monitoring. A lot of times as groups grow, I mentioned that, because these are part of watersheds, our DNR also is our water quality agency, and they have funding sources that these groups have tapped into to bring all their resources at a much higher rate. So DNR grants can be, well, tenfold more than this $40,000 for some of the grants that are available from them. But
Yeah, great, thanks. I know there are some systems of demonstration farms as well, where they have monitoring as well. I know Randy mentioned one with Discovery Farms, but I think there are several other networks in the state.
yeah,
Through that.
well, our NRCS has several demonstration farm networks that have grown alongside of the producer-led. DATCP does fund one of them in the Kewanee Door area. That's a partnership with our Peninsula Pride farmer-led watershed group too. But yeah, the interest in the resources that come to some of these more mature groups beyond this grant are pretty intense. And some of the groups that have been around a while, and I mean, with 9 years of experience as a functioning organization, they've learned how to apply for grants themselves at pretty high levels. There's a handful in southern Wisconsin here that have been a part of this and are a part of those groups that existed before the legislation. They're pretty successful at finding funds beyond this, and the grant, I would say, holds together the administrative part and helps fund the education and outreach, but a lot of other things happen from other funding sources, which unfortunately for me, the groups don't have to report to us because they're reporting it to other funding sources.
Right, it is hard sometimes to track all of that across a lot of different organizations.
Yeah. And somebody mentioned earlier the importance of I think it was Bradley. We do take it very seriously at the department that we want to stay out of the way. We want to support the groups and give them what they need, but we also do, this is not a top-down, we do not want to give the perspective that the department is driving anything that we're not welcome to be a part of, you know what I mean? So the grant process is there to really get this grassroots effort going, and we do, there's only one and a half-ish staff time that focus on this particular aspect, and we try to make sure that we're providing the support that we can to do that from the department.
Any other questions for Randy? I think we have about 7 minutes yet left, so I don't think it's quite enough time to split out into breakout rooms. So I think just a final kind of call here for other questions from the group. Either feel free to unmute or to type your question in the chat. While we are waiting to see if any other questions are coming in, I do want to mention that the Soil Health Nexus is hosting a regional training for ag educators. And so if you are interested in learning more about the Producer-Led Watershed groups and touring one of our farmer leaders and conservation mentors, Ron Shep's farm, we encourage you to join us in September. Randy's been integral to the planning as well as others in Wisconsin. We are planning an ag educator training. It's going to focus on conservation finance. And it's going to be in Arlington, Wisconsin, September 16th and 17th. It is regional, even though it's hosted up here in Wisconsin. So it's a great opportunity for folks from other states to join us. I have put in the chat a link to a survey. We're currently put a survey out to find out a little bit more about folks' interests when it comes to conservation finance. Conservation finance is a very broad term, so wanting to find out more about what exactly within conservation finance folks are wanting to learn about and their interests. So please take a moment and fill that out. You don't have to commit to coming to the field day just yet, but you can help inform the agenda to make sure it's most useful to folks. Any last call for questions for Randy and the Wisconsin DATCP team here?
Randy, Mark Dietrich again. You know, you've got a couple really good cheerleaders, Eugene Schreifer. He's
Yeah.
with FSA. He's really good, farms in Southwest. And then just a little while ago, I got an email from Aaron Silva. So you got a #1 draft pick researcher there as well. So
Yeah, those are excellent partners, Mark. Thanks for mentioning them. I just stopped my sharing, so I see another important partner, Craig. I'm sorry I didn't mention the St. County Foundation and all the great work that you've done to support this this program as well, and help expand on that. So speaking of expanding outside of the state, there are groups that are looking at some NRCS RCPP projects, so that might help as well. Maybe I'll put you on the spot, Craig, and let you talk about yours as we close out.
Oh, no offense, Randy, and we'll have more to in the next couple of years. Supporting groups in Wisconsin and kind of in parallel with DATCP through the ownership program award, but it's just still in the works of getting started. So over the next 5 years, hopefully we'll be able to expand in Wisconsin and introduce it in Illinois as well.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. I will share my screen here and let you know about next month. So June 19th is our webinar for next month. Oh my Lord, why does this happen every time? And we're gonna have Corrine Ketterings with Cornell University gonna be talking about adaptive management. So each month we're featuring different topics. If you have a topic or a speaker that you haven't heard that you would like to as it relates to soil health, please reach out and let us know. You can find all that information on soilhealthnexus.org, and that's also where we'll post the recording from today's session. So thank you everyone for being here, and Randy, thanks so much for your time. Thanks for everyone for your patience with some of our technical issues at the start.
Thanks for having me, and always great to work with you.